All right. So today, let's see. Hmm, Can you all see my screen? Okay. Okay, there we go. So today we'll be talking about how to support undocumented students in postbachelor programs. My name is Alejandra Silva Hernandez. I am the Pre-Health Dreamers Advocacy Assistant. And a little bit about Pre-Health Dreamers. We believe that immigration status should not exclude anyone from pursuing their dreams of higher education, careers, and contributing to their communities. We envision a healthcare system that's accessible and welcoming to all, regardless of immigration status. And a little bit of background about the definitions. Who are those individuals without permanent status in the US? They could be termed as undocumented, dreamers, documented, or TPS beneficiaries. And these are immigrants who lack lawful status granted by federal authorities and do not possess a visa or work authorization. Those who have deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA were able to benefit from this since 2012, and it's afforded many young adults a work authorization, a valid social security number, and a reprieve from deportation. Unfortunately, there is no path to citizenship with DACA, and as of 2017, no new applications have been accepted. Individuals are able to submit their DACA paperwork to U.S. citizenship, to USCIS, but they are not being processed. Similarly, TPS or temporary protected status recipients, they are benefiting from this program for a very long time. There's more than 25 countries, and these are nationals who remained in the US because something happened in their country of origin. So again, for this, there is no current direct path to citizenship. Somebody who has DACA and TPS can find a path to citizenship through other immigration processes, but not just because of having DACA or TPS. And even though we hear so much about DACA, maybe a little bit about TPS on the news, there's actually 9.4 million individuals who don't have DACA or TPS and who are undocumented in the US. And then the challenges that are faced by these undocumented students, because we're seeing more and more who don't have DACA or TPS, but even those that do, because they're getting past undergraduate, they're seeing that there's fewer scholarships and it's becoming more competitive to get into these programs. And so they're facing a lack of access to financial aid. They're having to work or take additional gap years in order to be able to afford their programs. One of my really good friends, she was admitted 2 years before I was, but we actually started a program together because she took those 2 years to work in order to be able to afford to pay for 1 year program. These individuals, they're not able to find work if they don't have a social security number where they can really feel secure, where they won't face somebody who will hold their immigration status over them, who might threaten them because they don't have a social security number. And they also face a lot of housing and food insecurity because of that lack of ability to have a livable wage. There's also a fear of deportation, not just for themselves, but for their families. And so what I see in a lot of the students that come to Pre-Health Dreamers is that they don't know how to ask for help. They've managed to get here all through undergrad, and now they're looking into health careers all by themselves because they have been afraid to share their status and their obstacles that they're facing. So they're really kind of like hyper independent and really struggle asking for help. What we see in our mentorship program, the Peer Engagement and Enrichment Program, PEEP, is that, again, there's more and more students each year who are part of our group without DACA. We can see that 62% of the 60 people that we have this year do not have DACA or TPS. And then this is a breakdown of the different careers that we are seeing in this cohort. We're seeing that about 30% of them are interested in medicine, 12% in nursing, 8% in public health, 6% in dentistry, and even other careers that are not listed here. We've had like optometry, we've had anthropology, and we need undocumented people in all of these fields to bring in our own unique visions. I mean, the more diversity that we have in a group, the more creative the ideas and solutions that we have for our different fields. And we also have 8% who are interested in pursuing postbac programs. And now some of these students have also selected medicine, have also selected dentistry, and nursing and physician assistant. So they're students who have identified that perhaps they need additional schooling before they're competitive enough for their programs. So we went ahead and then did a couple of surveys back in 2022. One was undocumented students pursuing postbac programs. So these ones were the students who had completed formal and informal postbac programs already. And then another survey that we did was resources for undocumented students by pre-medical postbac institution. So this was a survey that we sent out to different postbac programs to let us know the sort of resources that they have provided to undocumented students in the past. And based on these two surveys, we actually got a really good view and understanding that our preconceived notions of what the needs were actually supported by the students in our programs and the students who submitted these surveys. So we saw that internships, scholarships, employment opportunities, and career support were actually very difficult to obtain. It was kind of interesting how for financial support, there was like a lot of neutral responses and some very difficult. And then we also saw that there were, about half of the responses were neutral, and then the rest of the responses were like on either side for volunteer opportunities, mentorship, and knowledgeable advising that they received. So these are some quotes from the students from these surveys. This was a student who did an informal postbac program. They said, "I wish I knew how difficult it would be to find appropriate classes and scheduling them. I think a more formal program with more resources and personalization would have been better for me." And so that's what we see a lot, that, again, these students have been hyper independent. They haven't had appropriate advising. And so even once they're in postbac programs, especially if they're informal or whether they're taking one or two science classes at the time, they're feeling really lost about which classes will help them prove to their graduate programs that they are ready for the rigor of that program. Sometimes, they're still having to work at the same time that they're doing these programs. I remember when I started my master's in public health that I was actually asked to sign a form that said that I would not be working at the same time as I was doing the program. I signed it, but I wasn't able to actually go through with that. I actually had to work. Even if it was just part-time, I didn't have that luxury of not working. And so another question that we asked our students is, how familiar are you with the application process? The application process was arduous because I was unfamiliar with it and afraid of the consequences I might face by exposing my identity as an undocumented student. So we see in a lot of applications that they ask for the citizenship status. Sometimes, I think they're becoming more inclusive. So we see like US citizen, resident, DACA, or TPS. Actually, the TPS we haven't seen a lot of, and undocumented, but that's very rare. Right now, what we're seeing mostly is US citizen / resident or DACA. And once you submit a form like that and it gets processed, it can be very intimidating for undocumented students because they know that it's not just about their own status. They're also exposing their family members. And they've also said this about the need for informational support. Counselor said that he had never heard of DACA and didn't know how to help me apply or find funding for physician assistant programs. He also wasn't sure if I could apply at all since I wasn't a citizen. I lost motivation because I felt alone and didn't have the resources to guide me through the completion of the program. Another student said, my counselor was supportive, just not as knowledgeable. And counselors should definitely be required to learn about undocumented students and journeying through higher education. They also talked a little bit about the financial burden. They mentioned that a prep course for their medical school entrance exam, the MCAT, was offered. but that they struggle to stick to the program, the prep course, because of work. Another one said, I wish I knew that they didn't have the resources to support undocumented students. I would have saved up $6,000. And I didn't add this quote here, but they mentioned a specific program and how financially feasible it was. They just would have needed to work for a year before applying, but there was just a lack of transparency. I enjoyed the classes and I felt I received the academic support from my professors, but I wish the program would have had some resources for undocumented students, effective counseling, financial resources, or help in looking for those. One last question that we asked that I post here is, did your Postbac program assist you through the application process? So once they've completed the Postbac program, were they assisted in applying to their graduate or professional program? It was, but it was also very emotionally draining, as I had to continue to advocate for myself throughout the whole process. And that's something that we hear a lot from the students, that they are getting into these programs, but they're having to advocate for themselves before, during, and even after they complete the program. So the thing that we hear a lot from these students is the ping pong effect, where they reach out to one person in the institution, and then they get introduced to another person, and then that person introduces them to another person, and they're not getting any answers. So they just feel like they're there's folks that are trying to help them, but they're not getting the help that they need. And it can be so frustrating for students to try to do this at the same time as they're trying to be the best student that they can be. Thankfully, there's hope. This is some new data that just came out from the AMC. So, right now we see that there's about like 160 applicants since 2018 for medical school. And of those, a third are getting in. So, it's only a third, but that's a third that we didn't have before DACA. And so, I mentioned before I started recording that, these students are incredible, that there's so much resiliency, but we shouldn't ask these students to be resilient. We really should be moving away from that. And we found this really amazing quote. I dream of never being called resilient again in my life. I'm exhausted by strength. I want support. I want softness. I want ease. I want to be among skin, not patted on the back for how well I take a hit or for how many. And this is something that we share with our students, because a lot of the times they also feel compelled to share their story, to share their trauma, whether it's, when applying to programs or for scholarships. So we really want to make sure that if we're in a position where we're working with students, that we try to move away from this resiliency of really praising their resilience. And then for students, you don't have to write about the trauma that you've experienced. There are other ways to show your commitment to the community and share what you dream of doing in the future. So some of the other things that give us hope is that there's more and more DACA-friendly postbac programs. Almost 50% of postbac programs that are listed in the AMC have accepted DACA students, or they are willing to accept DACA students. And then in addition, there's about 106 programs that might accept DACA students. So, we would have to reach out to each of them individually to see what they're taking. But I suspect, like with medical school, that it will be state dependent. So maybe they'll only take DACA recipients from their own state. They might require DACA recipients to be able to demonstrate that they can afford the whole program, or they might have some other sort of stipulation. So this is a pretty comprehensive list. There's 318 programs that have said yes or no, we'll accept DACA recipients, or contact us for further information. But what we've heard from other postbac program directors is that they believe that there's actually way more than those 318 postbac programs. But since this is a fairly new list that is still being constantly updated, that is probably not the true reality. So if you go on IMC postbachelor pre-medical programs and you don't see one of the schools that you dream about going, or that your student is interested in also applying to, like really encourage them to reach out to the school personally to see, what do they accept DACA students and what kind of support is available to them. As we know, the benefits of admitting undocumented students is that you'll increase the diversity in the classroom enrollment, and actually it could even increase funding. We know that an estimated 10.5 million documented immigrants are in the US, and we've witnessed the lack of training and hands-on resources for trainees and current healthcare professionals to serve undocumented patients adequately. And that lack of equitable healthcare access and care for undocumented and immigrant community members can actually be enhanced by undocumented individuals who are empathetic to the vulnerable situations and unique needs of these communities. We believe future health professionals from undocumented and immigrant backgrounds have invaluable experiences caring for the diverse immigrant and undocumented underserved population. Immigrant students often lead advocacy efforts around healthcare access for undocumented and immigrant patients and identify health coverage resources for undocumented individuals. Individuals like
certificate.
And undocumented students can become knowledgeable healthcare professionals that will serve and connect with the communities from which they come. We know that health outcomes improve when there are individual physicians who actually reflect the patients that they treat. There's proven research that does that. And so we need not just gender concordance or race or ethnicity concordance, but also the immigrant experience concordance to be able to do that. And by providing the support and advocacy for qualified undocumented individuals pursuing careers in health professions, you can help close the gap in holistic support for these individuals within higher education institutions. Through postbac academic support, guidance, and networking opportunities, you can help equip undocumented students for success in health professional programs. Continuing to open doors for undocumented students will make a more equitable healthcare system and culturally aware professional world. So what are some of those strategies for admitted undocumented students? Creating a supportive environment, providing financial assistance, and developing partnerships with community organizations. We know that there's different kinds of support. One of them is informational support. We saw some of the respondents from the survey say, I need to pursue a postbac program because I took my prereq courses almost more than 10 years ago, and they will be expiring soon. And that's valid. That's something that we hear a lot of students have the misconception of, because there are a couple of programs who do have a timeline for how long ago you took your prereqs, but that's 2 programs out of more than 200 medical schools in the US. Most programs understand just how expensive it is to take classes. And so as long as you've taken a recent, competitive science course load and you completed your prereqs and you do well on your MCAT, that will show them that you are ready for the competitiveness of medical school or dental school or physician assistant program. So it's really important to be able to let students know whether they even need postbac programs, and then have a discussion with them about what that might look like for them, whether it's as a career changer, where they don't have the prereq programs, and they need to be able to do those through a formal postbac program or a special master's programs where they can have a master's degree after they graduate, or whether they need to pursue a record enhancing program to show that upward GPA science trend. And again, that could be through a formal postbac, special master's program, or master's programs. Additional information that you can share with pre-med students or within your institution is that students can advocate for the removal of the U.S. citizenship requirement in scholarships, internships, and programs. So, they might, if students reach out to different scholarships, internships, or programs, they might not be able to change the U.S. citizenship requirement that year, but maybe they will for the following year. Oftentimes, it's not that programs are consciously putting in a U.S. citizenship requirement, but they might have just copied a template application from another program. And so it's at the end of the day, it's a human being who's creating the application, and it's human beings who are reading the applications, and it's human beings who can make that change. As we see from the Civil Rights Act and the Immigration Reform and Control Act, employers are prohibited from discriminating based on national origin or citizenship status. So there are opportunities for DACA recipients and TPS recipients seeking employment. So why can't we do that as well for our students? In terms of medical school allyship, we know that undocumented individuals may have the opportunity to change their immigration status. It's not going to be able to be done right now through DACA or TPS, but they could have another option. Actually, Professor Tom Won at the University of California, San Diego, did a national study that estimated about 14.3% of DACA eligible youth were eligible for another form of immigration relief, such as U visa for survivors of certain crimes or a family-based visa petition. We've done surveys and have the data that over a dozen medical students with DACA have adjusted their immigration status while in medical school in the past 5 years. So based on this data, we can ensure that some students that are going through postbac programs with DACA and TPS, or even without a social security number at this time, may also have the same outcomes in the coming years of being able to adjust their status. In terms of residency or allyship for those medical students that are going on to residency, we know that residencies can be completed at hospitals, research labs, and other institutions for different health fields. So for nursing, for physician's assistants, and not just for medical school. And these residencies can be paid, and each site has its own onboarding process. So some facilities may assume that students with DACA or TPS can't complete the residency or can't do a background check. And the reality is that you can. You can do a background check with your name, date of birth, and address of where you live. There's some background check companies that do fingerprint. There's some background check companies that use an I-10. Others just use all zeros or all ones to run the background check. So even somebody who doesn't have DACA or TPS and they have no social security number can do a background check. It's all a matter of working with these different clinical sites to see if they will accept a background check from other companies. So again, just to reiterate, individuals with DACA and TPS do have a valid social security number that they can use, and they also have that authorization to work, so they can complete residencies. Other forms of support, just overall, having holistic support. If you're a change maker at your institution, or if you're a student, ask, does this institution offer any of these services below? Tutoring services, undocumented student club, undocumented student task force? Do they have dream or resource center, a lending library, transportation services, housing services, or food pantry services? And these are things that can really add up to the whole financial support that students need. And again, I realize that undocumented students may not be used to asking for help or used to asking for resources, but these are resources that can be created or offered to students. And it's really important to be able to highlight that and share that information with students who may not, have the ability to research that information themselves. So to kind of facilitate that, because I know how busy counselors, advisors, program directors, and deans can get, we really encourage the creation of task forces. So maybe there could be an undocumented task force, and these are some of the questions that you can find on this assessment that we have on the Pre-Health Dreamers website. So you can kind of look at where you stand. Do you already have these resources? Is this something that you can strengthen? Is this something that you have started to create, or are these resources that are not yet at your campus? And then what you can do about it. We really encourage schools to omit language that indicates that a student is undocumented. We see that a lot of students are automatically categorized as international students, and that can really create problems because they will be asked by the international office to submit proof that they can afford the lump sum of the program tuition before they're allowed to enroll in classes. And I don't want to make generalizations, but typically somebody who's undocumented does not have the generational wealth to be able to afford, 4 years tuition at a medical program, or like 2-year master's program, or like a 1-year postbac program in one go. So I think it's really important to be able to, categorize that this is a domestic student, that they will be paying state tuition, but also not highlight them as somebody who's undocumented. So some of the codes that can be used to keep undocumented students confidential: resident for campus purpose only, citizenship undetermined, citizenship ZZZ. And if you have others, either you've heard of them, please put them on the chat so we can add them to this list. It really does matter what kind of language you're using. And institutions are encouraged to create partnership with healthcare sites that welcome all students who wish to intern, observe, volunteer, or work. We know that there's some wonderful formal postbac programs that actually create these opportunities for students to do research and volunteer. And unfortunately, we've had at least one student who wasn't able to do that because they required a social security number to do a background check, and they were not willing to work with another background check company when it could have been something that they easily remedied. So, sites can establish welcoming processes to support the onboarding of undocumented students with DACA, TPS, or without a social security number. They can take extra steps to hire individuals with a strong background in working with immigrant and undocumented communities. If you can, hire somebody who has DACA or TPS, perfect. If you can consult somebody who, they have their own business and they may or may not have work authorization, but they can be a consultant for you. And then that way you can really create a space for undocumented students. Advisors, decision makers, and postbac programs, they're encouraged to get informed about different income generating options for graduates without Social Security, like creating your own business and becoming a consultant. And scholarships for tuition, room and board, books and emergencies, and even DACA renewal can really make the difference. It all adds up. We saw this really great research article about postbac programs. So this is done by, this was written by different physicians from Washington University, Ohio State University, Southern Illinois University, Michigan State University. And it's titled Postbac Program, well, Postbacular Pre-Medical Programs to Promote Physician Workforce Diversity. And they give a few sort of case studies about how actually changing your programs to mission-based programs can really create support for underrepresented students. So in 2014, 71 of the then 200 programs, postbac programs, about 36%, identify themselves as having a special focus on underrepresented in medicine or economically or educational disadvantaged students. And so these postbac pre-medical programs with this special focus on diversity, they were able to get additional institutional funding. And that was the strategy that they used. So their argument was that, we need to diversify the workforce for physicians. And this is the way that we can do it, by investing in our diverse and underrepresented students. And so at medical school graduation, they noticed that the students who participated in this postbachelor pre-medical programs were significantly more likely than their non-participant peers to go back to underserved areas. So the students were more likely to come back and practice in the underserved areas. Like there's data that was backing this up. And this is data from 2014, right? So now that, the undocumented population is growing, that we see more and more going into medical field, I'm really curious and excited to hear how that data might look like. Another thing that we really encourage programs to do is to understand the financial landscape, whether they've had undocumented students or not. There's a way to be able to capture data to then be able to apply for grants, to be able to ask for philanthropists to support their students. So looking at how many DACA and undocumented students are currently enrolled or have reached out to the institution, what that cost of attendance would be for those students, and how much the program or institution can commit to supporting them, to really get an idea of what the needs are. And some creative solutions are institutional scholarships. You can open up that eligibility to DACA, TPS, and undocumented individuals by removing the US citizenship requirement. You can ask donors if there's limitations on who can be funded. For example, like federal funding is not available to undocumented individuals, but as long as it's not federal, it is funding that can be used for these students. Now, if there's philanthropists and donors who say, I want my money to go to the underrepresented students, and they don't define that further, that's funding that can go to undocumented individuals. If it's somebody who has been very clear that they do not want undocumented individuals to benefit from that funding, then, that's a little bit different. But I hope that there aren't any funders who specifically say that. So again, somebody who's undocumented, they may, also be classified as underrepresented, as first generation, as having low socioeconomic status. And so they could potentially be able to access funding that's available to students from these other groups as well. And then, if you do have those funders that have those very strict stipulations, find new funders who are supportive. I know that it can be really challenging for programs if they say we're looking for funding specifically for undocumented students. But again, you can say, this is additional, the funding that we're seeking is going to be for underrepresented, first generation, or students with low socioeconomic status. There's also state-sponsored aid. So what we found really interesting is that some postbac programs, they're treated as kind of like a professional program, separate from the undergraduate programs. And so there's no funding available because the student is basically a professional who's taking some extra classes. But for those programs who actually classify their postbac program as a fifth-year undergraduate program or as a second bachelor's degree program, they're then able to access state-sponsored aid. So that could be a way to be able to get these students financial access. Another example is in Oregon is the Scholars for a Healthy Oregon initiative. So this is a survey-based 4 years covering 5 years in public health service. So even though this is for, once students get into their medical school program, just being able to understand that the financial weight comes during the postbac program, but then there is an option so that you don't have that financial responsibility, like that full 100% financial responsibility once you get into medical program. That can kind of make it possible for students to make that decision for themselves, whether they're gonna, maybe take a year or two to work full time before going to a postbac program, and then maybe take a couple more years before going to medical school, or whether, they can just go ahead and use the savings that they have now, use it all up for the postbac program, and then maybe take a year later to work and then go on to medical school, or go straight to medical school, knowing that there's an option for them to be able to afford their program. We also really recommend to advocate within the state. California and Washington State, and Oregon State, Here in the West Coast, I think we're very, very lucky to be able to have state-sponsored aid for our undocumented students, but that's not the case everywhere. And our students are everywhere. So, we can be used as examples of how it can be done. And the advocacy has to start somewhere, even if it's not going to benefit the students, next year or the following year. Hopefully 5-10 years from now, that can change. Another option, if students are really worried about how they're going to afford this postbac program and medical school, is this self-help credit union. So they are really well known to work with Loyola University Stritch School of Medicine students who have DACA. They're able to provide 50% tuition waivers, and then the school matches the other 50%, so the students are fully funded. Usually every year, it's a limited number of students who are admitted with DACA. At Loyola Stritch, it's about like 5, maybe 8 students. But what we recently learned is that Self-Help Credit Union is able to provide a loan to students who have DACA and are going into medical school outside of Loyola Stritch. So if you've been accepted to medical school, or you're currently in medical school, or friends who are, like, let them know that Self-Help Credit Union is now giving pretty competitive loans. It's about, they said, I think 7 to 9%, excuse me, 7 to 9% interest rate, which, for federal loans, it's about like 4 to 5%, versus private loans, which can be like 19% or more interest rate. So, if somebody has to use up all their savings for postbac in order to get to, where they want to be in the future, that could be some weight that gets taken off their shoulder. And another company that works, that's recently started kind of collaborating with us and letting us know that they're there to help DACA recipients, TPS recipients, is Social Finance. And they are working with medical students and non-medical students. As long as they're in a graduate program, they're able to provide some aid. And we actually have a presentation at the same time as this on that. So hopefully, we'll be able to upload that to our YouTube, and you can watch the recording of that to find more information. And so, these aren't the only credit unions. You can also work with, if you already have another one, or a local bank, to establish a loan program that's specifically for you and whatever needs you need. Some opportunities for growth that we've noticed is, I mentioned connecting with funders to help create those generous scholarships for students who don't qualify for federal, state, or institutional aid due to their status. Departments can take the extra step to hire individuals with a strong background in working with immigrant and undocumented communities. Advisors, decision makers, and postbac programs are encouraged to get informed on those income generating options. And lastly, working with community partners like us, pre-health dreamers, we have a whole host of resources available that you can use. The information that I shared with you about the assessment to see how DACA friendly, how TPS friendly, how undocumented friendly you are is listed on our site, so you can assess how your institution is doing. There's other information for postbac programs, for medical programs, nursing programs, dental programs. And, we really encourage you to look at all of our resources and connect with us online. We have the Pre-Health Dreamers PEEP mentorship program. It usually opens in November. This year, we had a research component. We know that many of our students struggle to find research, and that can really make the difference for those students that are interested in applying to research-heavy schools. So I really encourage you to take a look at our resources, to sign up for our listserv, and to connect with me one-on-one if you have specific questions about how to become a competitive applicant, whether it's for medical school, research programs, master's programs, postbac programs. It really is important to be able to learn to ask for help, to find like what resources are available for you, because it can get really expensive very fast. So in addition to the PEEP program and our educational resources, we also get involved in educational and health related policy. For example, the Health for All Medical campaign. And we also recently started the National Community Coalition. So we actually mentor and partner up with different universities to start making that network and develop resources for different universities to start training and sharing information that supports undocumented students. Next up, we'll try to create a roundtable discussion in May. We really want more advisors and change makers from programs to be there to discuss what has worked with their program, what needs to change, and really help each other problem solve. Like I mentioned, it's really great if you create postbac programs that can change the classification of the postbac program to a 5th year or a second undergraduate degree program, or to change the focus to be mission-based to serve undocumented uh, uh, patients or students by changing that focus to serving underserved, underrepresented students. So please let me know if you have any questions, and I can stop this share, or here you can take a look at my email and also put it on the chat. Any questions? Let's see. Looking at the chat. I'm seeing. Thank you, Vanessa. You're more than your numbers. Yeah, absolutely. You don't believe it, and you kind of you have to put like one foot in front of the other, but it's very true. Like the amount of times that I've heard that students say, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome, I don't feel like I belong. And they've done like so much work in terms of like volunteer and research, and they still don't feel enough. That's something that doesn't really go away, but you're definitely more than numbers. And then let's see, Leslie says, referring to this change in the system you're currently talking about, I would like to see a change in nursing program which require clinical compliance, which excludes those who do not have fingerprints or can have background checks or insurance, which is what causes many to postpone or sell for other dreams. Yeah, we actually, so there's a new policy in California that undocumented students cannot be denied from nursing programs. And the implementation of that actually has taken a while. So at the beginning of the year, there were 35 nursing programs that were still denying undocumented students. The students would tell us, I would reach out to different programs and they would all tell me, I'm not eligible, I can't apply because I'm undocumented. And that's actually not true. Like they can go ahead and enroll the students, and it could be like 2-year LPN or a BSN or like 1-year. And so it's that delay in implementation that we're advocating to change and update, because students, regardless of whether they have DACA or TPS or no social security number, can get the background check and can become nurses. Once they graduate, if you have DACA or TPS, you have that valid social security number and work authorization, so you can apply like anybody else. But if you don't have that, you have to become a contractor, work for, I think they call it duty free. So you're working for like a family or, just creating your own business in order to practice nursing. So far in Arizona, at least. And yeah, in Arizona, that's a different world. So like, there's a lot of advocacy work that needs to happen, but California can be used as an example of like what they did. So if you'd like, Leslie, like, send me an email. We have nursing allies all over the US. So maybe I can see if I can connect you. You may be the only one from Arizona, you may not be, but you can at least find allies there. That's, oh, Leslie left. Okay, I'll send her an email later. Anybody have any questions? And I can stop the recording.